Hello everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Thanks for joining us today. For those who are joining just me for the very first time, I'm Anshuman Kumar Prasad, one of the organizer of BUGTRONS 2.0. Welcome to BUGTRONS Con Series, powered by Prep Insta, streaming partner StreamYard, brought to you by DEVSTRONS, and Learn with Community. BUGTRONS as an initiative by DEVSTRONS began with a mindset of encouraging community folks and make them aware of the tech industries by putting emphasis on problem solving, code efficiency, code optimization, and logic based programming. We empower coders to get influenced by developing software, enhancing skills, solving bugs, and producing numerous opportunity via tech. If you haven't registered yet for the contest, the links are in description. I can already see you. So much buzz in the chat here. Like it's always been great to see you all interacting. And for talking more about open source and opportunities, let me quickly present you Shivay Lamba. I hope we all know about his achievements and those who are just get in touch with this session. He's a GSoC May 2021 cohort with TensorFlow. He is also a mentor of 2020 for Jenkins and CNCF, MLH Fellow, and he is also contributing OSS like Layer 5. It would be a pleasure to have you on stage, sir. Hi, Shivai. Hope you're doing
Yeah, thank
awesome.
you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Anshuman. And it's really great to see the initiative that your team has put up for Bugstron Con. And really happy and I feel privileged to kick off
Yeah,
this entire series that you have planned out for this entire month of February. And yeah, definitely looking forward to connecting with all the attendees who are watching this live session, even post this, conversation that we're going to be having today. So yeah, if anyone has any queries, of course, we have a really wonderful set of people who are running this particular initiative, and also like a lot of speakers who are going to be also presenting over the next few days and weeks, are going to be equally or even better than my experience that we have. So thank you so much, Anshuman, for inviting me over.
thank you so much for this pleasure. Like to have you on this stage is it's a great pleasure for us as an open source guru. so, uh, so Shivai, would you wanna give a short description about what we wanna cover in this session?
Sure. So since like this is sort of the session where we kick off things for Bactron, and of course one of the most important things is around development, and specifically around software development using open source. So we're going to be talking about what exactly is open source, and then we are going to be talking about what are some of the opportunities that you can have in open source, and not just like code contributions, but also outside of just programming, what all different things that you can actually do. And apart from that, we are also going to be covering on some most of the most important open source programs for for students. And even today, programs like Google Son of Code are from this year onwards will also be for working professionals. So how you can get started by contributing to open source projects and sort of develop that kind of a path for yourself to be able to contribute to larger projects, including TensorFlow, in which I had mentored in 2021.
Yeah, really a lot of things we have to cover in this session. So I hope it will be excited.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
absolutely.
yeah, thank you so much. So the stage is all yours, and
All right.
yeah,
So let me just quickly share my screen. Just give me 1 second. All right. Let me know if my screen is visible. Great. Yeah. Let me know if my screen is visible to everyone. If you could just confirm. All right. So I think it should be good enough. So yeah. So again, thank you so much for inviting me over for this session. And today's topic, of course, is going to be a lot more about open source, how you can get started with open source, and what are some of the most amazing opportunities that you can actually get by contributing to open source, right? So that's what we're going to be covering. Of course, Anshuman already gave a very quick introduction about myself, so no need to cover that. But specifically with respect to open source itself, we're going to be looking into three most important key aspects of open source. So the first one is that what exactly is open source, right? And this is especially for those who might just have started out with college, or might just have a lot of questions, queries regarding open source, right? Because of course it's not just like one specific thing. There are a lot of different things that come under open source. And then we are going to be looking into how you can become part of various open source communities. How can you actually get started by contributing to open source, and of course what are some of the perks that you can get by contributing to open source. And then we'll take an example of the TensorFlow organization of how you can actually get started by contributing to TensorFlow. So the first thing, right, that I would want to sort of break it down into is the words open and source, right? Open over here sort of really means that really the source code, because of course we are talking about open source software, OSS, that you might have commonly sort of seen it, is that open means that it's not just like open to anyone, but also in terms of like you can really come and contributing to this particular source code at any point of time. There is no restriction on you. You don't need to be employed by a specific employer or working at a company to actually be able to contribute to it. Or it doesn't need to be that, hey, you're working as a Android engineer and you just have also a lot of ideas on how you can contribute to machine learning. So you can just like go ahead and contribute to machine learning based projects without even having to know much about machine learning, right? That's the way that how open source really works, that it is really open to collaboration to everyone. It does not really discriminate against any specific person based on their gender, caste and everything, right? It's really open for everyone. And secondly, the source code that we know of, right, it's not something that it's proprietary, right? If you try to use it, you'll have to pay for it. It's usually free of cost and you can use it for yourself. You can even customize it based on certain rules that are mentioned in licenses, which we'll be discussing about. But open source is not just limited to software development. You can just think of open source programming, or OSS, that is open source software, as just one of the various different things under which you can find open source. It's more sort of a philosophy, right, that promotes the idea that anyone's whether it's like some kind of design, some kind of work, anyone and everyone can actually access it and use it, modify it according to their own needs, right? And actually redistribute it, right? That's by modifying the existing already existing product. You can sort of reimagine it in your own way, and then sort of share it with others. So it's not just limited to open source software development. You'll find it being used in art, fine arts, everywhere, right? So that's the beauty of open source, that it's not just for software developers. Even if you're not a software developer, you'll find it being used in some or the other way. People might not be necessarily aware that they are working on open source, because it's generally sort of limited to software development, but it's definitely not the case. And one of the biggest differences that you'll come across when you are talking about open source and closed source software, right? The biggest one is definitely that with open source, you are working and you are a part of a developer community, right? Which can be from anywhere from, like, let's say a few hundreds of people to, let's say, more than hundreds and thousands of people, right? And when you are a part of such a diverse set of a group of people who are all motivated by the open source principles, they are all passionate about the technology or all the product that you are contributing towards, that makes a really great environment to be in, right? Unlike the closed source, where, let's say, we take the example of Microsoft Word, which might be currently being developed by 50, 100 odd engineers at Microsoft. So you'll not find the source code being available outside of Microsoft. And in case of, like, let's say, open source software, it can be accessed by anyone. And that gives us two major benefits. So the first one is that because of the fact that open source software is so widely used, and just a lot of people are contributing to it, so in case there are any security vulnerabilities, there are any bugs, they can actually be solved in a much more quicker pace as compared to let's say closed source software, where dedicated team might be working towards future enhancements, right? So that's one of the major benefits of being able to be a part of an open source community, because just the sheer amount of people who are actually part of a particular project or a particular software, that it's relatively easier to be able to resolve bugs and security vulnerabilities in a quicker point of time, right? And of course, the second one is just that it gives you a lot more openness in terms of being able to collaborate with others, thinking about how you can, look out for ideas on how we can, improve the product. All of that is freely accessible to anyone who works in an open source software. And of course, they have been given the liberty to be able to work in a global community and actually change the source code as well for open source, while that's definitely not possible for closed source. And now talking about the FOSS itself, right? So far we have looked at, open source software, but what about FOSS? What exactly is FOSS? FOSS is basically free and open source software, right? But free not just in terms of like its pricing, right? But essentially, like, you have the freedom to actually use the product. You have the freedom to actually modify it according to your own needs, and then you of course have the freedom to distribute it further by, like, let's say you have made some useful modifications and you want to distribute your modified version to a certain set of audience, right? You can definitely do that, and that's provided over here, right? With respect to the entire freedom and the freeness of being able to, use, contribute, modify, and distribute the open source software that you're working on. And in case you haven't probably heard about Linus Torvalds, he is the founder of the, of the Linux kernel and Git version control system. So he says that in real open source, you have the right to control your own destiny, and that's actually quite true because, again, as I mentioned, that you're not working specifically under a specific guidelines like that you might work in, a corporate environment. Of course, you still be required to solve certain issues, but you really have say in how you want the open source project to actually go forward, right? That's something that comes as a bonus when you're contributing to open source, just the openness of people, and how much importance that actually goes when we are looking into, being able to take everyone's opinion and then make the best quality product, right? So with open source, you have definitely a lot of potential to carve out the path for yourself. And of course, there are certain criteria that are required to keep in mind when we talk about open source. So the first one is that, of course, it should be free of cost, right? Free, and we have also, discussed about the various aspects of being free, right? It should be accessible at any point of time from anywhere, right? You should be able to modify it, of course, albeit under certain conditions. For example, giving proper due credit to the original author of whatever project that you're modifying. And of course, it's open for anywhere, for anyone from anywhere part of the world, right? And of course, the final one is a really important one as well, that it should be open for reuse, right? There shouldn't be like this case where, of course, you have certain softwares that give you like 10 free trials and then you have to pay for it. So it can be used n number of, infinite number of times as required by the user. And some of the most important things to keep in mind on why one should actually embrace open source. The first one is definitely the quality and the reliability. And I'll look to combine the second point as well, because of the fact that since so many developers are working towards that, hot fixes, bugs, right? Any kind of dependencies, like those can be resolved relatively quickly because of just the sheer amount of people who might be there, right? Of course, at times this can probably be a drawback as well when you have so many people, but of course, in a well and an efficiently managed open source project, that can become super easy to conduct. Then the next one is, of course, the customization that you can do if you have, downloaded, or like, let's say, used one particular instance where, you have been given the liberty to actually change the design, change the functionality of an open source project. That is something that, actually comes out quite a lot with open source and working with open source, right? And of course, the biggest one that I probably feel is the collaboration that you do with other people, right, from other companies, and other communities, so you can collaborate with them, build together, right? And that's some of the best things about open source. And of course, we today have a lot of different open source projects, languages, right? A lot of programming languages are completely open source, like Python, Java, right? A lot of different operating systems, like the Linux kernel, right? Linux itself, Ubuntu, all of these are open source, right? And of course, this do not show like even 1% of all the open source amazing tools that we have. So basically, these just sort of show you that the amount of adoption that has increased for open source is incredibly huge, right? Just a lot of more number of people getting into open source, getting into building open source and realizing the potential of having open source as well. So I hope that makes sense to everyone. And of course, I love to speak about this as well, and that is the open source development model. So in a regular company, I mean, in a any kind of MNC that you might be working in, you might be getting basically, like, let's say, some tasks. Of course, there is a certain hierarchy that is usually maintained in this kind of a workflow, right? So you'll basically start off as, let's say, a junior developer, right? And on like around you, you might have some like senior developers, right? And above you, you'll be your manager. The manager will be reporting to someone, and then they will be reporting to someone. So as the the entire team size grows and you work, there are these different levels that we have. But with respect to with open source, there's no hierarchy as such, right? It's completely flat. That means that every volunteer, every potential person who wishes to contribute to the code, right, they can join the entire session, right? I hope this makes sense to everyone. So basically, that gives everyone an equal power to be able to collaborate, to suggest changes, and all of that can be handled very easily with the help of this particular open source model that is quite free and quite easy to understand. That everyone is given good opportunities to work on this. I hope this makes sense to everyone with respect to the open source development model. And of course, why one should contribute to open source, right? The first one and the most important one is the real world software development experience. So just fun fact to know is that a lot of core companies, they use a lot of different open source packages, open source softwares for their own development purposes, right? So basically, as you contribute to these open source projects, they are being used in actual companies by in actual hundreds and thousands of $1 million based projects, right? Products. So you do get definitely the software development experience because you are contributing to really large scale projects. You're assigned, right, how these tasks are assigned, then how you have to manage everything else, right? So that is included over here. Now, of course, the second one is also the community bonding, right? You just get to connect with a lot of different people sharing similar kind of experience, right? You get the exposure of being able to learn from more advanced people. You can get to test your own skills, right? To understand where exactly you lie. And of course, finally, it's all about satisfaction, right? So yeah, I mean, those are some of the most important things that come to mind, like why it's contributing, it's important. Now, how to get started with getting into the FOSS, right? If you want to get started with open source, like what is some of the things that you might require? So of course, the most important one is definitely Git. So Git is basically a version control system where basically you manage all your files, and if you're working on larger scale projects with multiple people, you can very easily manage how the files are getting edited, how they're being managed. All of that can be handled very easily with the help of Git. Then you need to know at least one programming language. That would be really great to know. And then of course, the most important one is with respect to the tech stack as well, because of course with just the programming knowledge is not enough, and we need to sort of know our tech stack as well. So I hope this makes sense to everyone. In case anyone have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll be more than happy to take them up after covering these some of these topics. And of course, if you want to learn Git, this is actually a really great tutorial. So you can go to https guides.github.com. I'll make sure to share a link for this. All right, let me just quickly bring this up. Let me just post it probably in the chat. If the moderators could add this link. All right. So if you want to go ahead and learn Git, you can do that by going to this link. This is officially provided by GitHub. So it's a relatively simple guide to understand how it sort of works. So yeah, the next thing that we're going to be covering is, of course, that, the biggest question that a lot of people ask is how to get started with open source, how to get started contributing to open source, right? So again, the simple answer is that you yourself have to start it, right? You don't need to contribute or, be able to solve like the world's largest bug in the first ever contribution that you make, right? Of course, you don't have to do that, right? You can always just create your own specific project, right? And you can use that project as well to showcase yourself, right? So you don't need to necessarily be like, let's say, I mean, what would the correct word to say? You don't need to be ashamed of like how can you get started. Just get started by contributing to open source projects that you build, and just build some sample projects, and then gradually you can, make even better as you become better at coding, and also with respect to, like you know with respect to open source in general. So it might take you some time, right? There might be some time where in which you might be able to solve questions, right? And you will be able to resolve queries. So that's something to keep in mind, right? And of course, these are some of the to-do lists that come to my mind whenever you're talking about like something like GitHub, right? So for example, if I go very quickly to github.com. Over here, basically, as you can see, like we have some various points that have been mentioned, including like the license tests. So basically, tests are software development tests. Releases are like whenever we want to release like a new version of the application. License is what is one of the most important things, right? Then of course, we are going to be looking at basically all these different checklists, and if you have them, it's really great. If you don't have them, it's not that bad, but of course it's definitely really great in terms of if you're able to solve a lot of these, it should do it. Yeah, so basically this is very specifically the to-do list, right? And of course, now coming on to the second most asked question is how to get started with fast development in various organizations, right? So of course we have a lot of different organizations that are building open source projects, and we are going to be looking at a couple of different ways in which you can get started, right? So the first one that we'll be talking about is basically the bottom approach and the top down approach. And for any whether like you're working on like the bottom up approach and or the top down approach that we're going to be talking about, the process is going to be something along these lines, that you need to be able to find an organization which builds a project that you are comfortable in building, and you are not just comfortable but you are excited about as well, right? And then of
Um,
course you start.
sorry, Shiva, for interruption, but your camera is not like visible, like it's showing
Okay,
up black.
now is it fine?
Cool. Yeah,
Okay.
it's clear.
Alright.
Cool.
Yeah. So as I was mentioning, that basically whether you use the top down or the bottom up approach, the process for specifically how to get started is going to be relatively the same, right? That you find an organization for which you're really passionate about, you start interacting with the people over there, and of course then you finally go ahead and start contributing with code, right? And of course that basically how to get started with that initial position of how to choose basically, so as I mentioned, there are two different ways. One is the top down and the other one is the bottom up. So with respect to the top down, what we're really sort of looking at this moment is how we can learn the skills that we have, right? Whether we are interested in JavaScript, whether we are interested in a particular language, and then whatever skills that we have gained or whatever programming languages that we are comfortable with, we start to choose or we start to look out for projects and organizations that are working towards that particular framework, right? Let's say, so for example, TensorFlow as an example, it's a lot to do with machine learning and all. So some of the most important skills that people usually learn before that is things like Python, right? So it sort of depends on where you want to contribute and going to know it a bit more better. Of course, the second one is that you list basically the uh, so you have to essentially choose like what projects that you are really passionate about, right? And then of course once you have chosen that, start learning the skills involved in that particular problem, right? So for example, if the problem requires you to connect to let's say, um what could be, I think like, let's say if it's built on Next.js and you haven't really covered JavaScript anytime before this, you can do that very easily, and start building the projects. So that's how you can also use it over here in this bottom up approach of choosing the right kind of projects and then being able to find out the correct result. So I hope this makes sense to everyone. Now, of course, how many organizations do you want to actually contribute to? That's something that totally does depend on you, right? If you want to contribute to five different organizations, this depending on you have to make sure that you don't spend too much time on a specific thing, and that helps you or sort of removes that particular portion. So I hope, yeah, I mean, it sort of just depends on you. And of course, the next thing is like what to sort of do after the organization has been conducted, right? So the most important things that one has to really keep in mind is basically being able to show proactiveness in the community that you're part of, right? So the first one is that you have to introduce yourself. Of course, just don't go ahead and straight away introduce yourself in like a general channel. Build up your credentials, right? Be active over there, right? And of course that will give you a good idea about it. And then you can search for specific projects that are currently under mentorship, right? These include all the way from some basic applications for I think Apache, right? And then of course you can think, or you could sort of talk about what are the things that you're interested in. For example, if you are interested in doing some code contributions, if you're interested in doing some non-code related contributions, you can do that and sort of then give your introduction on why you have joined the particular project. And of course then we have an API through which we're able to search for different projects. And basically let's say that there are certain projects that you really love and you are wanting to contribute to. You can search for them, look out for open source issues, right? Every project will have a number of issues that are assigned. So you look out for open issues and then fix them, right? Based on what is your understanding regarding the project. So that's the main point. I hope that makes sense to everyone. So you start off by just understanding and going through the entire organization, the various projects. Look out the ones that you are interested in, and then look at beginner friendly issues. Follow the best conventions. So the two things that I'll really focus on is basically the first one is having proper documentation, and then being able to close. Yeah. So if at any point of time, if anyone has any questions, you may feel free to ask. And of course, let's say that you get confused, right? So of course, sometimes you might want to filter out projects just based on programming language. Sometimes you might have a lot of different experience working with a lot of different programming languages. And yeah, so basically that's one of the most important things. Of course, the idea is that you don't have to wait for anyone, right? You have to start today itself, whether it's like just getting started with programming or it's getting started with open source, right? There's no foundation that you can keep. So I hope that definitely makes sense to everyone. And of course this is like sort of the life cycle that people usually have to go through when they are getting started with open source. So of course the first thing that you'll do is you'll find existing pull requests, and or let's say neon light that do require certain other things as well. And then basically the second thing to keep in mind is that the important aspect of this is that once you have submitted a pull request, of course there will be someone who might come and review, right, your pull request, and if they request for some changes then you can get that. Otherwise it's good enough to send, right? So these are some of the most important things that have been doing, right? So the most important aspect of all of this, right, is being able to find out existing issues that you are truly passionate about, right? And being aware that sometimes people who are going to be reviewing these issues might take some amount of time because of the fact that they might be having full-time jobs, and they might be looking at issues of multiple more people. It's really just important to keep that in mind. And of course, with respect to the others, we finally just create the pull request and wait for it to get accepted, right? So those are some of the things that we sort of do in this developer cycle. And of course, I mean, there is it's completely natural that you might find yourself in a position where basically you start having doubts because you see a lot of other people being able to sort of uh, you might find people gaining a lot of different things. And again, there's definitely no denying of the fact that it can be a slow process. Open source is not something that you just directly jump into the bandwagon and you become successful at it. You might have a lot of different trials and errors before you sort of are able to contribute quicker. But it's definitely something that you have to keep in mind. So even if you do have any particular apprehensions, or you become a bit let's say you start thinking about this, you just know that you don't need to be a pro at all. You just need to know about a good being able to know about a good opportunity, right? Where you find yourself to be better placed, right? You don't need to be a pro. The only thing that you do require is, of course, knowing the basics so that you can do your job, right? So that's definitely true. And of course, you don't need to be formally from a CS background. You can really just come in from any particular way and do that. And of course, you don't need to really understand the entire code base in order to contribute. And this is a really important point, because a lot of time people just look at one file and they see, hey, I mean, there are 30,000 commits in this probably might be really huge. And that's something that we are trying to make it better, right? So essentially what that means is that you don't need to necessarily like you know how should I put it, that you sort of don't need to look at the entire code base, but only those particular parts of the code base that are going to be relevant to, let's say, the issues that you are working on, right? Just understanding the entire project, or the entire ecosystem in an easy way to understand. And then of course, after that has been done, we can sort of interact as much as possible with the developers, right? And that will actually give you a lot more better insight as well, right? So yeah, I hope everyone gets these points, again, very important. And of course, we have a lot of different open source programs, right? A few of them, for example, the Rails Girls Summer of Code has been closed for now, but of course we have Hacktoberfest, Code Heat, the bountiful open source program Summer, Outreach. These are all different types of you could say these are all different types of programs that have been specially curated for software developers, right? To be able to take part in them. So this is where you can basically, if you're a student, you can sort of apply for them. And essentially, if you get selected, you get to work on an open source project with a mentor, with other people, right? And that definitely helps quite a lot. So I hope this makes sense to everyone. And of course, let's say you have applied to one of these programs and you don't get selected, right? It's completely fine, right? That it doesn't need to be let's say that you have and again, this probably might change a bit more, but just think of it in this way, that you can always apply again. And a lot of these competitions, they are now shifting, right? So of course, it might not be possible for you to know the exact details, but of course that feedback definitely should help, right? That is provided. So yeah, basically the thing is that keep striving, keep working towards being able to contribute to these open source projects, and you may never know, right? You might get up these being part of these open source projects. Of course, at the end of the day, these are mentorship programs. These are by no means software development as such, at least just for the haze. And of course, what does that means is that just keep thinking about ideas, right? and how we can make this better. So yeah, I hope that makes sense to everyone. And of course, when you do get started by contributing to these organizations and these projects, a lot of the time that is spent usually is like, just understanding like about the technologies, understanding the documentation, going through the code base, right? And like, sort of looking at all of that there. Now, apart from that, basically a lot of the time is also going to like, how we can learn new technologies and how you can collaborate with others to be able to make some meaningful projects, and right, being able to contribute to other open source projects. So that's something that you learn as well while like you start contributing. So these are things that go on with you and make you better, right? And of course, I mean, everyone like, loves swags. And what are some of the like things, advantages, right? So of course we have sort of now defined that open source gives you like an ability to do real world programming, right? To receive feedback in that sense. Like, we are getting to interact with millions and hundreds and thousands of developers. We are like, sort of also interacting with a lot of different other people right around the globe, and we are collaborating with them, right? It's all about collaboration, code, and the openness of the software. But of course, outside of that, there are a lot of different perks that you get, especially if you are like part of these like, programs like Google Summer of Code. So you get stipend, and of course you get to experience of being in an actual open source project and being able to contribute to it, learning really great skills as well as a developer, right? And of course you get to work on real life projects. You have opportunities like as well. So those are some of the things, right? And of course, as I mentioned that you might probably just be called upon to visit one of these conferences, right? These conferences usually provide their attendees or their speakers basically a lot of different basically they're provided a lot of different like, possibilities and opportunities to showcase what they're actually building, right? At some of the world's largest conferences include like the Linux Open Source Summit, I mean KubeCon. These are just some of them to name a few. Depending on what particular open source project that you're working on, you might be just be invited for free of cost, so you can travel, you can share with the entire world, share with the world's best developers, network with them, and just talk and brag about your project that you're building, right? But of course, so far we have sort of looked at like open source from a code perspective, but that's definitely not true, right? Open source is not just limited to contributions that people are making with respect to like, coding, right? Open source is for everyone, right? So even if you are not a coder or a programmer by default, you can still actively contribute to open source, right? And that's one of the best parts about open source, about the openness that it provides and the platform that it provides to people, right? So whether you are like sort of interested in like, let's say, documentation, right? You might be interested in just like doing project management. You might be interested in doing UI UX designing because you are a UI UX designer, right? You might probably just be a user of the open source application that is being built, right? So basically that's one of the most important points that I want to raise about open source. And the fact of the matter is that open source again is really available for everyone, right? You are going to be working on a lot of different projects, right? You are going to be uh, collaborating with people who might not necessarily be developers. So the baseline is that even if you are not a programmer, you can still be part of the open source software development ecosystem, and you can always like, contribute in any of the ways that you would want to actually contribute, right? Some people they actually write the open source software code. Some people work on technical documentation. Some people work as freelance writers, just being able to like, go through the project and writing something about it. And of course, some people like to just be part of these general discussions on from a leadership perspective, right? So there's definitely a lot of chances for you to be able to contribute, even if you're not like, let's say, a developer per se, or you are just a new developer, right? You're just getting started. So that's one thing to keep in mind as well when it comes to open source. So again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. I'll probably just take this time at this moment to probably take up some questions if we have any, Anshuman. Would love to sort of take up any questions. Let me know if there are any questions so
Yeah,
far.
sure. Um, okay, so let's start from the very like basic question people are having. What is the tech stack? What the tech stack meaning?
Oh, so basically, the tech stack is essentially a set of tools and technologies that you'll be using to build a project, right? So, for example, we talk about Mern Stack. So, Mern Stack is MongoDB Express, which is part of Node.js, and then of course you have like React, right? So basically, and Node, right? So it's essentially talking about what all different technologies that you use to actually build projects. So that's essentially what a tech stack is.
Okay, so we have another question as follow. Like different companies have different kind of software with wide variety of tech stacks used. How can we choose one to
All
contribute
right.
in?
So that's definitely a good question, Gulam. Thank you so much for asking. So I would say that because of the fact that there are so many different technologies, when you are just starting out, in that case, what you can do is that the best way that I'll suggest is to explore when you're just starting out to see what particular programming language or what particular tech stack that you're comfortable with. Some people might be comfortable with JavaScript, some people might prefer, like, let's say, Java more. So it's something that you have to look at. There's no denying of the fact that yes, some programming languages might have more adoption as compared to other programming languages, but that doesn't mean that some programming language is better than the other programming language. It depends on the use case and what you're trying to solve, what are you trying to build. And with that in mind, you can explore various options. For example, like, let's say if you're really into web development, so you can get started by looking into JavaScript. And as you explore further into JavaScript, you will have various frameworks, libraries in front end, and then you can also choose between different languages within backend. So there's a lot of scope of being able to understand what particular type of tech stack do you want to actually use, again depending on the requirements, right? So I hope that makes sense. I'm not able to actually hear you, Anshuman.
Oh, so sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I hope that answers your question, Gulam. They are the one from the organizer team as well. So
Okay. All
yeah,
right. So
Akshat,
Akshat asks, what do
can you?
you think? Oh, yeah. Open source contributions in good organizations is equivalent to professional work experience. So Akshat, I mean, that's a really good question, because some people are full-time open source developers. They get, like, they make a living out of just contributing to open source. But it's definitely true that if you're able to make some meaningful contributions, so I'm not talking about like doing some kind of a typo fix. If you're really making like a meaningful contribution, in that case, yes, it's definitely probably even better as compared to working in a professional work environment, where even if like you're working, like, let's say, at a company like Google, you might not be working on the most breakthrough project or a project that impacts a lot of people. But whereas with open source, there are so many projects that impact like millions of people, right? So you might actually get to work on such kind of projects, even though it might be a little difficult to contribute to it. But definitely, if you're making some really good quality contributions, then they are definitely on an equivalent level as compared to professional work experience.
I hope that makes sense and answers your question.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I guess we are done with the questions now.
Okay. So I think we can proceed further. That's great. All right. So let me just bring back my presentation. So of course, as we were discussing that you don't need to just make code based contributions. You have definitely a possibility to also make non code related contributions, and that's something that is one of the most great aspects of being able to contribute to open source, that you're just given that kind of flexibility, right? But of course, I mean, if you take part in open source, that doesn't mean that recruiters will come flying at you, and they'll treat you as gods. You still need to, of course, be at least decent enough in other aspects of computer science, if you're like specifically talking about software development. And that means that you need to be good with at least understand and be able to solve questions in data structures, algorithms, right? Because that sort of still gives you like a building block that is required. And of course, you still require to have that knowledge to be able to crack and be able to get through various interview rounds. So that's something to keep in mind. So in general, like what we have really learned about open source is that everyone has the same passion. They share the same goal of being able to create being able to create impact with the help of open source, right? Everyone shares what they are building, shares the tasks, right? And of course, that means is that it's easier to sort of look at what we need to work on. And of course, since it is completely open source, that's really great as well. And finally, of course, we get the chance of being able to share what we have been able to work on and share with everyone, because it's an open source project that you're working on. That gives you the flexibility to share about it as well, as much as possible. And again, whatever project that you build, right, it should be open source itself. That means that you have to make sure to be able to actually go and get be able to share these projects that you build with others, so that they can also suggest their own improvements in them. So yeah, that's essentially what the open source is all about. And before we move on to the next topic, and that is regarding TensorFlow, I'll just give a very quick overview about the what exactly is GitHub, and about Google Summer of Code as well, because those are two really important points. So for specifically starting out with GitHub, because usually GitHub is one of the places where you'll be working on a lot of different open source code, right? So you can just go ahead and use GitHub. And basically over here on GitHub, you can create like an account. So you just need to enter your email, your password, right? And then what you can do is that basically I'll go ahead and make like a new repository, right? So basically a repository is like a project, and you will have a lot of different of all your different files of your projects over here, right? And I'll just give this the name of it's not right. So I'll just give, I hope Anshuman, I'm writing the name correctly. uh is it Bugtron or Bugstrom? Right. I'll just keep it Bugtron. For now I'll just give it like a description of.
BUGTRONS.
Okay, so
Bugtrons.
it's Bugtrons. Okay, all right. I'll just give it a name and then a sample repo. I'll just give it, and then of course, basically, since you're talking about open source, that means that the source code that you have is going to be public, and it should be visible to everyone. That means that you should keep it public. Although GitHub does provide you the provision to actually also create like private repository in case, let's say you're working on something that is personal. Now you'll sign also a few other things, such as initiating your project repository with, right? So basically the readme is sort of the guide that allows you to make or sort of understand what a particular project or repository is all about. So your readme will contain anything from making you understand what exactly is the project that is there, what are the ways to actually install and use the project, what are some of the ways that you can actually contribute in. So that is one more really important thing. And the other one that we did cover slightly was licensing, right? So there are a lot of different types of licenses. We have MIT license, Apache license, and these licenses sort of describe in what way can you actually use a particular software, right? So of course, with open source, like you're free to modify a particular application in any way you want, and actually go ahead and distribute it again. But there are still some clauses that need to be maintained. So you can set this license to make sure that if there is something that is like specifically with your project that might be probably used in a wrong way, you can mention all of that in the license, and that helps you sort of safeguard your project. For now, what we'll do is that we'll just add like a readme for now. And as soon as I create a repository, as you can see, this has created a repository. So this is an open source contribution that I've just made. I've created a repository. Of course, I mean, specifically for those who are just getting started with, there's another contribution, right, that we had just shared recently, and that is like basically that you don't need to even contribute or start thinking about contributing to larger organizations. You can get in touch with your friends and people to be able to work on this, right? So basically you can get um, uh, like help from your friends, right? You can collaborate with each other, and that's also a possibility to do, and that's very easy to do actually with with open source, and especially on platforms like GitHub. So over here there are some terminologies that we'll be covering. So the first one that you will find over here is issues. So basically the issues is the specific place where you can report any bug that you might have found out, you want to suggest like a new feature. All of that can be handled directly over here in the issues tab. And then of course we also have basically the so if I go back and if I search again, right? So if I search basically for yeah, so if I go to the issues, like you can create issues, right? Then basically we have a few other things to keep in mind. So fork is basically a way in which you can create like a local copy of an open source project. That doesn't mean that you own this particular project, but basically you can create a, your own copy. So if you try to fork this, you can create like a version of the same project, and you can actually change it. And then of course if you have made some meaningful changes, you can go ahead and request for those changes to be merged alongside your contribution, right, to make that happen. And of course then with respect to the stars, that's basically like a bookmark, that the more number of stars that the people make, we are able to do that. And then of course as we were discussing about some of the other things within issues, right? So as we create like an issue, someone might actually be able to solve it. Now this particular project that I own, right, currently I'm the only one who can actually work on it because I am the original owner. But of course you can call in, or you can dial in how we can sort of increase this expandability or like this entire system, and how others can also contribute. And that is where the pull request comes into the picture. So pull requests are ways in which you can request. So for example, like let's say you are one of you actually goes ahead and wants to contribute to this BUGTRONS project. So you don't have access to my repository as of now, right? But if I share this this particular file, then what will happen is that we'll be able to match and be able to use it but in case again, like since right now you can see like there are none open, but essentially the main idea is that if you don't have access to a particular repository and you still want to contribute to it, you can fork the repository, you can make changes, and then you can submit a pull request, right? And that what that means is that the person who has made that request is requesting you to go ahead and add to it, and then make it. So I hope this makes sense to everyone. And I'll just quickly give a very quick demonstration as well for this in a small bit. But of course these are some of the most important things. Of course, as I mentioned that now if you're using git locally, you can just go ahead and start off with git as well. Like if you are using git locally, you can copy the https command, and you can get started this as well. All right. So basically now I'll just give a very quick sort of a sample of how you can actually create like pull request. For that I'll just quickly go to one of my friends repository. So he has a lot of different repositories. So I'll just go to his repository once. So let me just probably search for a particular repository. Let's say I want to, let's say, contribute to this particular project that might probably be like, let's say, okay, I can probably contribute to this project. So what I'll do if I want to contribute to it. So there are two ways, right? Of course, the first way would be that in case you do not have access to it. So if you don't have access to it, you will have to do it from like the outside the office, right? Or like you'll have to basically do it from your own fork that you create. Now, in case you do have access, then you can directly contribute to the project, and I will also share what's the best practice for it. But in case you don't have access to particular repository, you have to fork it. So I'll basically go ahead and I'll fork it. Okay, so I had actually already forked it, and this is how my fork sort of looks like. And as you can see that basically I had created new commit to my repository last year, and I think I had already created like a pull request for it. So what I'll do is I'll probably take some other repository in that case. So let's say I go back and I select another repository. So let's say I take this as an example, right? Yeah, I think this one should be it. I hope. Yeah, all right. So I can take this one as an example. I can click on fork, right? And I'll copy my name. All right. So as you can see, like now what I've done is that I've forked this repository and I've created my own version of this particular project, right? And I own it completely. So now basically what we can do over here is that we can make some changes. So for example, let's say that I want to go ahead and probably we can add like a beer tag over here because it was in the same line. So we could just add this and we can now click on preview to see how it looks. All right, so it looks much better. All right. So over here, I'll just update, right? I'll say added a line break. So basically, what we're doing right now is you're like doing a our own commit, right? And in this case, the comment that we are adding is we have added like a line break in the README, and this is the commit that we are going to be making, right? So over here, it basically like gives you an idea that you can either directly commit to the master or the main branch, or you can create like a new branch. So for branching, just understand Git is essentially, for example, you are working on a project, so it might be working on the the production environment, but basically with respect to being able to make a pull request, we can count that off, and then just like let's just start off by adding like a line break, right? And I'll just go ahead and commit this change. So right now what I've done is I have like created a commit in my fork, and now what you can see over here is that this says that this particular branch is one commit ahead of middle puller, right? And I can go ahead and click on contribute and actually create a pull request. So what this will do is that it will tell this particular user that hey, like this person is interested in being able to contribute to it. So I can go ahead and create over here. So over here I can create like a pull request, and this will basically show you what all things are added and going to be removed, right? So we have just added basically a line break, and I think that that should create the pull request, right? And now if I go to middle pullers, as you can see that this one basically have two different pull requests. Of course, one is by me, whom I added the line break over here. So I hope this makes sense to everyone, right? And yeah, I mean, of course, the best way again to do would be not to probably use like master branch. If you're, let's say, working on the same repository, you can always create new branches within Git. You'll have Git branch, Git branch, and then you'll start off, and that's how it sort of works. But yeah, I hope this makes sense to everyone. Let me know if there are any questions so far, Anshuman.
Sure, yeah. So they are really experience sharing with your sessions,
Yeah.
and Joshi they shared my first open source contribution was drafting the documentation for a project, and some more people are follow up this and sharing their first contributions. As my first contribution was in CSS, changing one line of code in a huge code base, and
I mean, I haven't really found out any one particular person who might have done like a very, very big contribution in open source. For me personally, it was like changing HTML tags. So you make your way from there, right? You start off small. And that's one thing that I'll really recommend to everyone, is never to lose hope or like get demotivated. For me, I was particularly trying to contribute to one open source organization by the name of First Asia, where the first four pull requests that I created, I was rejected. Right, they were simply rejected, and then I was able to make one on a project that was again based on that. But yeah, so that's one thing to definitely keep in mind, that with open source it can take time. You just have to be consistent and consistently deliver, right, within, whether it's like the in any form. So that's definitely something to keep in mind.
Yeah, even uh, Harsha is asking one question as what do you think creating an open source project is important? Like you might create projects and contribute to open source in that way as a developer, or is
Yeah.
it you just contribute in other project and make it big?
All right. Okay.
So,
So
hello.
first of all, this is a really good question. Whether we should look at building our own softwares, building our own projects, or let's say being able to contribute to projects. So I would say that building, you should ideally try to do both, because of two reasons, right? So why you should choose to build your own projects, because that will give you an end-to-end ownership of being able to build everything from scratch, right? From thinking about what are the features that you want in your application, what is the schema design going to be looking like, what is let's say, so the other factors, such as what the technology that you'll be using, right, what are the features that you would want to have, right, all of that. And then of course building the entire application, deploying it, and sharing it with others, gaining feedback from the users. That's something that you cannot do necessarily all the times with open source, because there are so many other people who are contributing to it. But at the same time, with if you're just working on your personal projects all the time, you'll not understand what other people are doing or what the industry is working with on, right, because you'll just be always at home. But now the good thing is that when you combine open source with this, with open source that delivery, right, or basically the best way to probably put forward it would be that you just get to know a lot more, because you're part of such a huge group of people and a huge community, that you learn a lot of more newer skills, right? So that's the main difference that you can find between building your own projects and open source. So I would definitely recommend to go with both. Projects give you a holistic understanding of how to build things, but with open source you learn best practices that might not be necessarily be true when you just build personal projects on and on.
Yeah, so I hope that makes sense. And even if enhancement in any project can featured as a contribution is a great contribution, whether it will be code or document. So yeah, even we can do it with the with the help of open source program as well. So there
Yeah,
you just mentioned that there are a lot of programs open source. Yeah, so
absolutely. So probably as the next step that I'd like love to now talk about Google Summer of Code. So we actually have Google Summer of Code coming up this year, right? So I'll quickly just go to the Google Summer of Code website, and I'll just quickly walk through what exactly is Google Summer of Code. So basically, as I mentioned, like Google Summer of Code is an open source program. This was started more than 16, 17 years back now by Google, with the main motive that they wanted students, right, young contributors to contribute to open source projects. And that is what, was the main aim. And that still is a main aim. But there were a few changes that occurred last year. One of the biggest ones being that now it's not just limited to developers. You'll also be able to actually use it with this index. So I hope this makes sense to everyone. Right. So basically now, if you, even if you're like, let's say, not working, but of course we can have like working professionals, people who have just gotten out of college and they're looking out for opportunities, right? People from the underrepresented sectors, they'll be able to actually solve, right? So that is something that will be happening. So that's like what really is the Google Stone of Code, right? So what that means is that you get the opportunity to work with some of the world's best open source programs, open source projects, because we get a lot of different amazing projects within Google Summer of Code. And usually how it starts off is that during the months of February, that's where organizations apply to become organizations in open source in Google Summer of Code. Then once they're announced, we are like, there's some specific values that are announced, right? So in that case, basically, you have to apply for like a specific project that we call as proposal, right? So you apply via proposal and you select particular projects that you are interested in contributing. Then you start contributing to it if you get selected. And then of course you get a lot of other things, such as like, now, like, let's say if you're selected, you take part in a 3-month program where you're contributing to open source, right? And you're basically contributing to open source. You are working under the mentorship of a mentor, and you're not only enhancing your skills, but you're contributing to and giving back to open source. So Google Summer of Code by no means is like an internship program as such. It's more just to help you get started with open source, right? And be able to actually contribute. There are a lot of different organizations. So every year, there is a certain number of organizations that get selected. So we can look at the past programs for that. And for example, like, we have had 2021 and all the years before that, right? And this basically gives you a bit more context and like searchability. Like, for example, like, let's say if you are just interested in web development, so you can search for projects that are open sourced. So you can do all of that as well. So over here I can probably let's say search for web, right? So it will show me all the different projects that are there in web, right? And then specifically, like, let's say if I want to type TensorFlow, right? So I can find TensorFlow over here, right? So basically, this will then show you all the different projects that were there, right, within TensorFlow. Then it will show you who is the mentee, mentor, and what exactly was the project all about. So that's one thing to keep in mind when building this. All right. And so yeah, for us specifically, we are going to be looking at the other value. So basically, we'll go to TensorFlow, and yeah, I'll just quickly go back, and I can quickly show you for 2021 how does that actually look. I'll search just for TensorFlow, and we'll quickly discuss about what exactly is TensorFlow. So TensorFlow is the official library that has been provided by by Google. So it's like not just library, but basically it's a framework of sorts that are used quite a lot for highly computational mathematics, for used for computer vision, machine learning, right? And of course there are a lot of different tools that come within under TensorFlow that we'll be discussing, of course. But yeah, I mean, basically this is how you can apply for like various projects, and then of course you'll be able to work on this. So I'll now quickly go back to my slides. All right, let me just bring it up. So after like having spoken about this, like we're going to talk about like how can you actually contribute to open source within TensorFlow, right? So we'll be discussing about all things related to TensorFlow. So the first one is what exactly is TensorFlow, right? And where exactly is it used? So basically, TensorFlow is used, as I mentioned, it's an open source framework used for a lot of different applications related to machine learning, right? Whether it's like related to computer vision, NLP, standard machine learning based systems, you can use TensorFlow over there. But it's of course not just limited to that. You can use TensorFlow in IoT based devices, web applications with TensorFlow JS. So a lot of different methods like of being able to like use this kind of collaboration, right? So basically, since it is an open source framework, everything about it is open source and you can contribute to it. And TensorFlow actively takes parts in Google Summer of Code, it takes parts in Outreachy, right, and all of other different programs. And so sort of if you want to get started, like let's say with learning how what exactly is machine learning, how to get started with machine learning and TensorFlow, in that case, of course, there are certain things that you need to be aware of. So the biggest one, like before starting off with TensorFlow, is that you need to be proficient in Python, or like let's say in machine learning technologies at the start, right? Because of course, you need to know at least two really important things. One is the mathematics that is involved, because of course we know that with machine learning everything is related to mathematics. So you need to be good and well proficient in mathematics, Python, right? Learning these technologies, and then you sort of use this on top of let's say the the I think it could probably you could say that to really work on TensorFlow, you need to be well suited with the timing, right? And of course, then once you have learned TensorFlow as well, then you pick up projects and then you start implementing, right? So those are some of the key points that are kept in mind. Again, if anyone has any questions in any of these, feel free to ask, right? So once you have let's say learned how to use TensorFlow, then of course start building your own projects, start implementing it in real world situations, and that will give you a lot more perspective as compared to this doing research. So basically try to implement it and then see what kind of errors that you actually run into. So that's basically the learning path, right? That you start off with the basics of Python, machine learning, and let's say other ways, and then of course you start learning with contributing to open source and how you can do that, right? Picking up like a project and then of course implementing it. And of course, there are some other learning resources that I'll definitely share with everyone. I'll be sharing these slide links as well. But this gives us a good time to explore a bit more about TensorFlow and what are the different ways in which you can actually contribute, right? For that, I will go to the official TensorFlow website, which is tensorflow.org. I will just quickly share this with everyone. All right. So yeah, this will just be shared with everyone. All right. So first of all, as I've already mentioned, right, that basically what exactly is TensorFlow. Of course, it's being used for this as well in certain ways. And of course, with respect to the TensorFlow, basically you'll find this community section, right, where you can learn how to basically contribute, right? You'll find a lot of different ways in which you can contribute to the community. So over there, I'll just go ahead and look at the. Let me just bring this up. Right. So yeah, basically over here you can find how you can get involved with the community, right? There are of course the TensorFlow forum, right? That's part of the official basically you can ask any kind of questions regarding TensorFlow, any of the products, right? So yeah, I mean basically these are some of the ways in which you can get involved. Now basically with respect to some of the other things, right, like why a person decided to shift, right? So over here if I click on community, right, so if I click on let's say join, so basically this will give you abilities and how you can get started, how can you join the community, right? All of that will be provided. And if I go back to the contribute, let me just go there. Yeah. So of course whenever you want to make your first example, you can go through all these different things that are mentioned about being able to let's say write code, or you want to improve documentation, if you want just go ahead and answer some queries on mailing list, right? So all of that basically is going to be related to what you're going to be doing, right? So maybe this is something to keep in mind while trying to follow, right? I hope this makes sense to everyone. So these are all the different ways in which you can use this. So if anyone has any questions, you may feel free to ask at up till this point. Anshuman, do we have any questions? I think you're speaking on mute.
Hello, hello. Am I audible
Yeah,
right now?
yeah, you're audible.
So for now, there is no questions, but we are sharing all the resources
Yeah,
mentioned by you.
all right, that's great. Yeah, and then of course, even if you don't want to make like contributions via code, you can always just like go ahead and do that with all the other things, right, that we have already covered. And then basically, the next thing that we're going to be looking at, that what exactly is the deal with the code base, right? For that, what I'll do is I'll quickly go to TensorFlow, and you'll find a lot of different projects that are out there right now, right? For example, we see the main TensorFlow. So basically, the main TensorFlow has been written in C++, right?
Um,
So basically, you might not be aware, but even things like Python, right, has been built on top of C++. So the entire TensorFlow framework itself has been built
but,
on top of.
sorry for interruption, but your camera is blackout
Oh,
again.
okay. Let me just quickly check. Oh, sorry, the flap again dropped. Is it fine now?
Yeah, baby.
All right, great. Yeah, so basically, with respect to TensorFlow, as I mentioned, that it is like an open source framework and it's been built using C++. So, for example, if you are a contributor, what you can always do is like for any organization, you can go ahead and search specifically for a particular language, and you'll find all the repositories that are there. So, for example, if I want to specifically search for TypeScript based projects, and one of them being is TensorFlow JS, that I am actually quite a regular contributor to, and that's TFJS. So basically this is what you can find, that you'll find implementations in each one of them, like in a variety of different languages as well, because of the fact that basically there are so many different people using these projects. As you can see, 15,000 plus stars. In TensorFlow we probably had like 100,000 plus values, if I'm not mistaken. So this way, like, we have all of these different these repositories, and any of these can be taken into consideration, right? So basically, with respect to this, we are going to be using this, right? And yeah, I mean, like, we some of the most important projects that we have with respect to TensorFlow include the TensorFlow Core API, right? Then let's say we have things such as all the different SDKs. So we have like upload let's say for Swift, for Java, for Python, right? We have a support for all of these different platforms as well, right? And of course there are some other projects as well, including like the demos repository, right? Yeah, so basically you can take a look at all of those and start to look at it. So some of the most important ways, like, again, to keep in mind is that these are larger projects, and I would definitely recommend to everyone to make sure that you don't rush through the projects. Always, for example, if you want to contribute to TFJS and you're getting started with, the way to do it is that first, as I mentioned, identify the project that you want to work on, right? For example, in this case, I want to work with TFJS, right? So I'll click on TFJS. I will basically go ahead into pull request, right? And I'll see, yeah, I mean, I want to contribute to this because I see, like, yeah, there is some good documentation, right? Now, basically what we need to do is that be able to create like uh, an solution through which we're able to get these numbers, right? So basically, with respect to TFS, what I'll do is I will go through the README to understand everything in more detail, and then what we are going to be doing is that we'll create like a SAP application, right? So basically, what that means is like an issue, and stating that, hey, like, you're interested in actually contributing to it. So over here, basically the way you can do that is by looking at labels and looking specifically for good first label or beginner friendly label, right? There might be actually one label that might be related to it. In case it's not, then I think you'll be able to find it in a lot of different other programs, right? Because you yep, yep. So basically, these are all the labels that we have. uh, so yeah, basically, this way what we can do is that we can search for specific labels and then try to find, right? So I hope this makes sense to everyone.
Yep.
All right, now
By, re- by repeat, yeah,
hello,
by
am I
repeating,
audible?
a beginner should always be look for good first issues.
Exactly.
Uh, just
Yeah.
to add, yeah.
Yeah, for some reason I'm not able to find it over here at this moment. But yeah, I mean, I hope that gives you an idea. Probably what I can do is I can actually go to layer 5, because I think that's probably the best example. So I can go to the layer 5. Yeah. So this particular organization, Layer 5, huge shout out to it. Huge shout out to Anshuman as well. He has been a regular contributor to one of the main projects over here. So I can go to, like, let's say, this particular project, like let's say Meshery, and I'll definitely find some. Oh my bad, I'll have to go to the repository. So I'll probably just take up the Layer 5 repository over here.
Slash layer 5.
Yeah.
Yep.
So over here, if I go to the issues tab, you'll definitely find some issues that might have the label of good first issue, right? So usually what happens is, like, then whenever you have these good first issues, I think it's over here, or probably later. Yeah, over here. So usually these good first issues are really sort of, easy for, like, newcomers to get started with. You just have to read through the project quickly, and then, like, you get the uh, like ability to actually, like, create projects. So yeah, I mean, that's basically be able to contribute to the project, right? So good first issue is what you should target if you're just getting started with the project, because that helps you two things. The first one is that you're not sort of, under the impression that, hey, you have to look at the entire code base, because that's definitely not true. A good first issue will be, like, working towards a particular part of that project, and that will be a good step for you to get started by just understanding the workflow of a specific part of the project. And as you grow more comfortable with, like, in the entire system, like, you will be able to make better judgments, right? And then you select a project and you're able to contribute to it, right? So that's the main idea behind good first issues. And of course, for starters, you might fix, like, some of these issues. You might look at some very quick bugs that can be fixed using the good first issue, and then that will give you the confidence and, like, the experience of actually working with that project, and you'll learn more and more. You'll be able to go much more deeper into the project without having to necessarily to like, worry. So I hope that makes sense to everyone. So as from a contributor perspective, the way that, like, if you want to get started with TensorFlow, for that matter, it would be that you start learning, right? Like, you start by learning some basic things such as Python, machine learning, basic machine learning concepts, right? Some basic trigo, like, another kind of metrics as well. And then once you're done with this, you start learning TensorFlow. And then once, of course, you're like, you're comfortable with that, you can look at a number of different projects that TensorFlow like, of course, offers. For example, for me personally, I have been working with TensorFlow JS for quite some time. But we have a lot of different other ones, like we have TF Lite for micro, we have, like, data sets, we have, like, performance comparisons, right? We have TF Hub, which provides all the different machine learning models, right? So all of that is handled through this. So yeah, I
Um,
mean,
I want to say something.
yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, I just shared one link on the like chat. The layer 5 carrier, as we are talking about the open source and opportunities
Yeah,
plus layer 5. So here is the thing, like carrier opens like carrier of like layer 5. There have been a lot of programs here. So
yeah,
I think sure I would know about this already, but
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, with Layer 5, I think it's one of these organizations that, like, has been there in almost all the open source projects, open source initiatives that we have, including, like, GSoC, that is Google Caesar on Docs, Google Summer of Code, Community Bridge, which is now known as the Linux Foundation, mentorship program, right? Hacktoberfest, then Layer 5 providing internships themselves, then Eminence Fellowship, right? Outreach. Like, so there are a lot of different, like, ways in which you can get started with open source, right? So I was, of course, specifically talking about, like, TensorFlow as well. So once you get started with all these different, like, technologies, you're comfortable with them, right? You just have to go ahead and look at some of these projects that you are comfortable with, and in order to see, like, which particular projects that you can work on, we basically have this archive, right, where you can go to any specific archive from before, and you can, like, search for projects. For example, if I, like, go ahead and work on how it, like, works. I can, definitely understand, how, yeah, this would sort of, work, because over here, with respect to, if I go to the past programs, you can sort of understand what all were the project ideas. For example, for the year of 2021, what were the different project ideas under TensorFlow? So that will give you an idea, like what all projects from TensorFlow were used, right? If I look at the 2021 ideas, or yeah, ideas list, probably that would be better. You can find over here, like for example, there were projects related to TensorFlow Hub, TensorFlow JS, TensorFlow Lite, TensorFlow datasets, JAX. So basically, this just shows you, like, these are all the major projects that, people in hundreds and thousands of people use them, and you're contributing to these projects, right? So that was basically for 2018. Yeah, but I hope this makes sense to everyone. And yeah, I mean, I would love to, Anshuman, for love to take any questions that we might have.
Yeah, I'm looking into it, but I guess there are, like pretty much clear about your topics.
Okay.
So they doesn't have any questions right now. Yeah.
All right. And probably the last couple of suggestions that I'll have specifically for Google sort of code is that whether it's like any program, right? You just have to start early. You need to sort of showcase to, the mentors or people who are reviewing your candidacies, that how well and how interactive are you, right? Whether you have, of course, the technical skills is really important, but technical skills in open source is not just the only thing, right? Communication is equally important, because open source, you're collaborating with others, and in case you have a very bad demeanor, then it's not going to lead you anywhere, right? So with open source, collaboration is equally as important as is the code, right? So you have to showcase that. You need to show that how well you're able to adapt to different things, and of course be able to share this particular issue that we just saw. So yeah, with that in mind, yeah, those are some of the most important things that I'll definitely keep in mind. Even with TensorFlow, right? TensorFlow is a bit more advanced in that aspect, so I would definitely recommend to understand C++ as, and that's also not just like the 11th 12th C++ that we do, or C++ that we do in college. It's more so towards like the mathematical side. That's something that you should keep in mind when you are building, right? Yeah, so I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. So I guess we doesn't have any questions. This is a link for Layer 5 Keras program, and the resources have been shared by you. So
Yep.
I guess we are done with the session,
Yep.
and
Yep. We are done.
it's really been a very great session. And do you wanna add some closure, like what you wanna suggest?
Yeah, absolutely. So as closure, I would just say, if you're able to probably share my screen. Of course, I mean, you can always connect with me. I would be there, on the Discord channel. But just as means that, if you, first of all, if you want to connect with me, the most active that I'm on is on Twitter. So you can connect with me on Twitter on the rate how develop. You can connect with me over there. But yeah, basically, the most important thing that I just want to share is that, in case you are looking to, get started with with anything, right, with any particular project, with any technology stack, with open source, just think of as open source as not something that to be you have to be scared of. Even if you're just making your own personal repository on GitHub and making it public, that is an open source contribution that you have already made, right? So then, of course, that's one of the biggest reasons that I just wanted to share about that. So essentially,
Yeah.
yeah, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right.
Please,
So
please
yeah,
continue.
basically, oh, all right, all right. Yeah. So just get started, right? Build your own projects, collaborate with your friends, maintain best open source practices, right? And that will give you a lot more confidence while contributing to open source. And when it actually comes to large code bases, don't get intimidated by them, right? Sort of take it in a structured approach. Read the documentation, read what are the steps of actually installing and actually working with that particular application. That's going to be a really important step while you're working towards building any project, or you're contributing to any project. Get started, good first issues, connect with the mentors and the people in that organization, if you face any issues, right, they're always going to be helpful, quite helpful, and be ready to actually help you out, right? So those are some of the things that I'll recommend. And again, specifically for TensorFlow, you just have to be a regular contributor. The level, I would say, is definitely on the higher side, because it's an official Google project that comes under that Google Summer of Code. So they are a bit more extra strict in terms of, like, what you do. So just keep that in mind. You need to be aware of, like, things such as like basics of machine learning, data science, and this particular meet as well. But of course, with respect to, like, TensorFlow, the most important is, like, C++ is a really important aspect, even though it might not be used otherwise, but you'll still find it being referred, like, if you really want to understand from the back end how things work, right? So even if you are, like, working with TensorFlow JS, you're still having parts of the code base where you're trying to, like, implement these values. So I hope that makes sense to everyone. And of course, you can always connect with me if you have any questions with respect to how to contribute to, like, TensorFlow, what are the different steps to contribute to open source. I'll be there, of course, on the Discord channel as well. And yeah, I think with that I can conclude.
Okay. And one last thing I want to say, like we as a like as an open source community, we are building DevStrons. So
Yeah.
this is a thing, like we are. So any suggestion for us? Like you have been already mentored with a lot of like organizations, plus like mentoring us as well right now. So do you want to have any closure or suggestion for us as we are
Absolutely. So
right now building? Yeah.
yeah, the most important thing that I've really felt, and that is really important, is that how welcome can you make new contributors get felt, right? And that's probably, Anshuman, you'll agree with me that with layer 5, that is a case that we had, like, a really diversified getting started process for new contributors. And how can you make them feel comfortable in contributing to an open source project and make them feel special, is something that, like, we have to really keep in mind, because they are the contributors. Like, if they can regularly contribute, they can build a lot of other things as well for whatever that you're building, right? So that's one of the most important things. And the second one is just, like, being consistent. And so that, what that means is that even if you're, like, let's say, building uh, like a e-commerce clone, just build it, like, have everything properly documented. If you do not document your programs properly, then you'll have basically the time of new contributors getting waste. So make sure that everything is documented perfectly well. And so that, like, I think a lot of times people do not really think about documentation. This is go ahead and start building projects. They start building things without thinking twice about the documentation, because the fact is that if you have good documentation, then a developer will have a really good experience. Like, if you talk about developer experience, that their experience will be really great, and you don't even probably need to then send them, like, some other value. You can directly just manage that. So that's also really important to keep in mind. So diversification, making sure that you have good documentation, is really important. And with that, you just have to find people who are interested in your project, who want to build projects that people might be interested in, and you can find more and more developers who might be interested.
Yeah, so that's a good takeaway from the community side. And yeah, obviously the diversify is always matters, and plus the
Yep.
inclusiveness as we maintain in the layer 5 as well. So welcoming folks and make them as a unique person. So
Yep.
yeah, it's really the greeting is like the thing we can make on the open source community, and should always do. So
Absolutely.
yeah, Ananya said, thank you so much. It's really a great session. Yeah. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and I hope that everyone else also has all. We are, like, there are a lot of other wonderful sessions planned, so really looking forward to witnessing all of them. And I'll be there in the Discord. So if anyone has any queries, feel free to reach out to me.
So yeah, this is the that's all for today, and it's a BUGTRONS conference series, as we already mentioned in the very first, powered by Prep Insta, streaming partner StreamYard, brought to you by DEVSTRONS and Learn with Community. Thank you so much, Shiva, for being here. It's our pleasure.
All right, thank you very much.